Yeah, so we're going to start up here. We ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right. "400 BC, Plato, Solon, gathered together, having a beer. Solon tells Plato an amazing story. Atlantis, this place you can only imagine. I'm going to tell you all about this sitting here, and you're going to have to write it down, and then you're going to pass it on for thousands of years to come. And so here we are. We're going to talk about Atlantis tonight. Josh, admin and creator of Ancient Amnesia. I'm Dave. And just going to chat about Atlantis a little bit and bring up some things we know and things we hope to know in the future. So my view is it was basically a seafaring society, interconnected all around the world, similar symbology, similar cultures, probably a lot of similarities. Peru and Egypt probably being, the two of the most obvious places where the seat of power would be. But a lot of people say it's out in the ocean, up past the Straits of Gibraltar there. So I kind of like to think that it was something that covered the entire planet. That's my opinion. And Josh, what do you think, man?
Yeah, welcome to our Atlantis podcast, guys. I think this is a good start for us because there's so much to that entire idea. Atlantis ties in so many things. It ties in the Ice Age, the fact that were there people living, before our known history? Were there people living 15,000 years ago? Where does language come from? Where do these myths come from? Where's the idea of God come from? It ties in so many aspects, I think, of what people are interested in this field. And one thing I think is fascinating about Atlantis is I think people want it to be true. And it's exciting. It's exciting because there's so many possibilities. So when we talk about it, one of the things I like to do is I like to start from scratch. Like, what is possible? What do we know that is true? And what does that mean for the potential of something like Atlantis? So I think, well, okay, the Earth is billions of years old, and we know that there's been, a potential of life for millions and millions of years. So, maybe there was other cycles of evolution that brought creatures that were advanced, and they rose and fell over all this expansive time, and they're lost, and who knows how far back that goes. I think that's a possibility. Bone and material can only last so long, and then it gets turned to dust, or it's under the ocean. Our planet's 70% water, so we don't know what's down there, and the ocean just destroys it. And once it gets down there for thousands of years, so it's something at least that is possible on the scale of Earth's timeline. In terms of anthropology, we know that modern human is, hundreds of thousands of years old. So what that means is that they were as smart as you 200,000 years ago. Okay. They had the same capability. They had the same laptop, right? Like they're all running MacBook Pro. They're all running the same power. So what they did with that power, with how they used that power, we don't know. Like we think that we have this timeline, but we look at also the weather patterns, and we know that there was all kinds of tumultuous things happen. We've had a show on cataclysms, and these things wipe out civilizations, and biology kind of destroys itself in ways that it evolves and dominates and takes over, and then breeds in and breeds out. And we see this happening in the biological record. So this is where my brain goes. I kind of try to at least put it in a scientific perspective. Like, what do we know is true? What's happening with biology, anthropology, geology? How does all this stuff, at least put a frame to the possibility of this being real? And so, that's what I think Atlantis, people kind of look at it at this, oh, but that's just not possible because it was only 15,000, that's 15,000 years ago. And that's nothing compared to modern humans, which have existed for 250,000 years. So, or longer.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's really not really a far stretch. I think people need to kind of understand that 15,000 years ago, in terms of anthropological time, modern human time is not a very long time.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that's where we need to start, you know,
It's
Dave. I think we
1
should.
foot of 1 foot of sea level rise, you know, in that amount.
Yeah, it's all it
Yeah.
takes, you know.
Yeah. So, you know, you basically just, you know, raise your house up a little bit. You have 1,000 years to do it. So yeah, that's how it is. It's such a minuscule time space, you know, and
Right.
it compared to the overall time that humans or human-like creatures could have existed here, you know, with the atmospheric conditions and environmental conditions. So yeah, it's obvious that you know, that's the case, and there is the possibility you could never find evidence, no matter how hard you look. Like you said, could be under tectonic plates. You know, could have been in an acidic sea that just dissolved everything, you know, and just turned everything into you know, minerals. So yeah, you have no idea really. You know, I would think that Atlantis was probably the last of the great societies that were more connected to nature. I would say that our society is sort of superficial compared to what I would imagine Atlantis to be. I think they would have been, you know, they would probably have had wars and conflicts with, you know, people that didn't want to adhere to their ways, you know, because they were pretty much, you know, the captains of the sea, you know, that nobody would turn them down, you know, they would just overpower them. So, you know, I would say they were very compassionate probably, and able to, you know, solve problems with a little bit more respect for each other and for nature. And, you know, that's just what I would imagine it would be like, but it might have been totally different than that.
Sure.
But,
Yeah. I'm sure it's a mix, you know. I mean,
right.
but another thing I think people that are trying to always search for Atlantis, they need to realize is that, you know, America is also Hawaii, and America, you know, is also Puerto Rico, right? Or America
Alaska.
is also, you know, Alaska, and so Atlantis is a dispersion of
Right.
it's an empire, right? So,
yeah.
you know, it's all dispersed, and so if we can understand that there was this empire that was all over. And if you look today, you know, like there's modern societies and there's still tribes in the rainforest, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like 15,000
right.
years ago or 20,000 years ago you couldn't have kind of both situations going that exist today. You know,
Sure.
we know that down in the jungles that there's tribes that are still living like they did thousands of years ago. And up until recently in America, there was tribes living like they did in the Ice Age and thousands of years ago. So this idea of having advanced societies living with primitive societies is just true even today. So you have this potential of this, you know, population that is advanced. Where they came from, that's another bigger question that obviously can't be answered. But if they did exist, it would explain a lot of things that we see today in all our mythologies. We see in language, you know, etymology and all these other fields that are just kind of unexplainable. You know, why are there pyramids all over the planet? Why are they scaled the same? Why is language, you know, have these kind of key words that even go transatlantic? You know, in the you know, the word Atlantis actually doesn't have a European origin. The first origin that they found was actually in the Maya, where they had a place called Atzland.
Atzland, yeah.
Atzland, actually in the Mayan, and this is a place that was in the east, in the ocean to the east, which is where, you know, is supposed to be
Sure.
in the Atlantic Ocean. And they would send all of their kings over to this place to get basically approval for things that they were doing. And this is in Mayan text. You know, we actually have a lot of information coming from the Maya about Atlantis, which is interesting because this is a civilization that lived contemporary with Plato and before Plato.
Right.
And so,
and fairly late as well.
And fairly late as well. I mean, there's still, you know, Mayans live in Mexico.
Yeah, they still are. Yeah.
And there's new research where there's literally dozens of temples that LIDAR just found. And so there's tons of stuff to be just, you know, even discovered, and more text will come out. But, you know, you have these correlations. And so it would explain there being this kind of central population that exists, this central civilization that existed sometime. And kind of taught people just like we do today. You know, we go to these, we send missionaries, we come out, we help other groups kind of advance and teach them modern agricultural. We teach them technological building skills, and they kind of get up to speed. You know, the first world teaches the second and the third world, and they finally kind of
Sure.
rise. We're seeing this in India and China now. You know, they're westernizing and they're becoming smarter, and they're using our techniques and stuff. So, you know, we're witnessing all of these things. So the theory of there being a civilization back in the past, having done that, like it's already happening, of course, you know, I don't see that being a wild idea anyway. And then the research that's coming out of the whole cataclysm and Randall Carlson's research and the stuff that's coming out of the Ice Age impacts, the Younger Dryas events, what gives you basically a scientific pinpoint for there being the cataclysm that could have ended a civilization like
Right.
Atlantis. And that's exactly what all the texts are saying. They're saying,
Well, and that's how they said Atlantis went down, you know, I mean, basically in a night, you know.
Absolutely. So, you know, there's a lot of evidence. I think people should look at the evidence scientifically and
Yeah.
realize, hey, that gets them more excited, because it's like, if you want answers, they're all there. There's great, awesome answers in every field of science that will back up all the story,
Right.
and fill it in.
There's religion as well. You know, there's a lot of stories.
Well. Yeah.
You know, a lot of stories about floods, you know, in certain religions.
Yeah, you have.
Gilgamesh was a giant, you know, and, you know, so yeah, that's the way I see it is, for me, Atlantis would be pretty much, they would have had to been wiped out, because we don't have any evidence of really technological things, you know, I mean, except for megaliths and, you know, some structures that are like pretty amazing. But, you know, like you said, there's no laptops, you know, there's no wheels from cars or engine parts or, you know, stuff like that that are being dug up. So, you know, if they had technology like that, you know, it's buried. You know, it would have had to have been so cataclysmic to just, you know, bury it under everything, you know, that, to never be found.
Right.
And so if we think back and say, well, there were 10 civilizations like that, you got to figure 10 civilizations like that over however long, buried under there. I mean, how deep does it go? You know, I mean, it's, at some point you hit the magma, you know.
Yeah. Well,
like, so everything must be just pulverized, you know, and just either turn to dust or just,
people,
you know,
people
just
say
drowned under glaciers.
People are like saying, well, there's no evidence. Yeah, there is. Look at forbidden archaeology. There's drill bits. There's
Right. Yeah.
that stuff is also there. You know, it's actually more than you would think there is. You know, there's anomalies. There's
A lot of oop arts.
all kinds of out of place artifacts that are there for you to look at too. So again, there's always an answer to your question. Like, well, where's this? Well, here it is. Well, what about this? Well, here it is. Manly P. Hall, which we have to do a show on Manly P. Hall, because
Yeah, he's the best.
He's a monolith educator. I mean, the guy, I mean, he's called the master of the mysteries, you know, and he grew up in such an amazing time where there were so many amazing people. But he, you know, he traveled the world and wrote about everything he saw. And there's a story that he was talking about in his Atlantis lecture, that he was talking to an Indian chief. This is probably in the 1920s. And he was showing him a ancient Chaldean text that had some writing in it. And the Indian chief stopped him as he was flipping through it, showing it to him, and he said, "Wait, right there." And it was actually the text that had to do with the Hermes Trismegistus.
Right.
And the Indian said, "My ancestors could read that. I recognize that writing." Which is interesting, you know. So it's really interesting stories that come out of some of these researchers and some of these you know, educators back in the day that you don't really know about. But you know, you do have this kind of collective idea of a flood. The Native Americans talked about it. The Mayans talked about it. They talked about a guy called Quetzalcoatl who came over. He was white. He was bearded. He was in a ship. He taught them agriculture. He taught them government, and he taught them everything. And then he said, one day I will return, and he never did, which explains the story of why, you know, Montezuma, when Cortez landed on the coast, he believed that this was Quetzalcoatl because he's returning finally. And that's what actually got him in and basically, you know, got him to kind of get his stuff together to destroy the empire, take it over. But you know, this stuff rings true. And we also look at gods, you know. I mean, the Olympian gods, the Egyptian gods, the Thoth, right, who was the builder and the writer, and he taught the Egyptians language and building techniques. It's the same guy, right? So Quetzalcoatl is Thoth, and And then you have the Olympian gods, which were talked by the Greeks as being humans and ancient kings, right? The kings of Atlantis. So, it all really is fascinating when you look at it that light, and you realize that these myths may be talking about the actual people that came over. You got to imagine if Atlantis was a colony like America, like if Atlantis had this dispersion and there were Atlantean soldiers and philosophers and teachers and farm builders and agricultural guys, and they were living in these other areas, and Atlantis, then some cataclysm came in and hit, you would then have to realize that these people were stranded in these other societies, right? And so these other societies would have to then be on their own, and the people that were left would have to kind of like teach them how to kind of pick things back up. And that's exactly
you'd have similarities, and then you'd have new stuff, new things.
That's right. And that's what we see. And when we look at the earliest Egyptians and we look at the earliest Sumerians, we see that just out of nowhere, these guys were able to create and build, and they knew math, and they knew how to like write, and it's almost, it just fits the story perfectly that there was something that happened to a high civilization, and it was dispersed around the globe, and they came in, and they ended up just kind of having to pick up pieces again and teach them what they lost. And so it's amazing, and to think about this stuff. And I want people to understand that this is like this. There's a lot of evidence to this stuff, and
sure there is. Yeah, there's a lot of evidence. Basically, when you have this much evidence, you can't pinpoint what it was, but you definitely know something was there. And then you look at, as far as Atlantis, I think of the rings, and is it a metaphor or is it literal? There's a lot of both, but the rings could be, latitudes, longitudes, there could be a lot of metaphors mixed in there for, how Atlantis wielded its power. Each ring that it had, the concentric rings weren't, actually walls or, a city. They were rings of power, where, there would be different levels of government and different levels of, people that would rule over and lord over everyone. And, that's kind of how I see the rings, kind of like a metaphor. And then you have to look at it like the Phoenicians, who do we have later on down the road? When it all came about, suddenly the Phoenicians and the Sea Peoples, they had all the same aspects of what we would expect from Atlantis, and from what Manly Hall tells us, that they were a seafaring society that covered the whole world. Ships in common. Right. So, but you got to figure, back then the ships were made out of wood. They were made out of organic materials, cotton and wood and whatever else they would use to build them. So, that's why we really don't have any. From that far back, we find Viking ships that are, 700 or 800 years old, or 1,300 years old or whatever. And, and they're somewhat intact, but imagine, 12,000 years.
Yeah.
It's just going to be, buried in the muck under 100 foot of sediment. You're rarely going to find anything, and that's what I think it is they used a lot of organic materials to build what they had. And when you use an organic material, it decays, it just falls apart and, transmutes back into elements that it was, when it was created. So I think that's where Atlantis is lost. There's a lot of it that's been lost. I don't think there were, transistorized electronics and, jet engines and stuff like that. I think they dealt with everything in a different way. I think they had a real subtle, natural way of doing what they did.
Manly P. Hall says that they had a extrasensory perception.
Right. Yeah.
Much like young children, right? So young children can pick up on things.
They weren't messed up by society yet.
Yeah, their ego hasn't formed and tightened, and so they're just open, right? They're really feeling it out, and so I think that's what he was saying that they had, that they were able to come in and just have that kind of open sense perception, which it's not talking about like, levitating rocks with their minds or shooting magic bolts out of their fingers or anything. We're talking about something that we all have in us, that we all actually sometimes get in those states ourselves, when we're in open states, and maybe thinking about a friend, and then all of a sudden our phone rings and he calls us, and that's
what's influence. It's all influence and, the connectivity.
Right. And some of this science that we're talking, some of this stuff we're talking about right now is in our Electric Universe Theory podcast,
Yeah,
where we talk about what science could possibly tell us about how these things could be possible, these extrasensory perceptions, and how that ties into, you know, what's around us, the Electric Universe Theory in particular.
Well, you want to wonder what that tomato plant is saying to the zucchini plant, you know?
Yeah. Right. I mean, that's the Baxter Effect, right? Where he
yeah,
took,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, you know, he took that plant and he goes, you
Sure
know,
did.
maybe I should just burn this
I'm
plant.
just gonna
You know?
chop your
And all of a sudden the plant's like,
yeah.
and it's like, he's like, I just thought about hurting that plant and it responded.
Sure.
So yeah, so this stuff exists, you know, these kind of, this idea of this greater civilization. And, you know, we're not talking about a very long period of time. Sure, they could have been, if you look at the Egyptian king list, and this is what people freak out, like, oh, it can't be true. You know?
Yeah.
Oh, it can't be true. It just goes back too far. It goes back 20,000 years or however long. It's like, well, I mean, sure, it could be true. Like, what if there was a pre-diluvial civilization that existed pre-ice age, and what does that mean? You know, maybe these guys. So imagine Egypt being a colony of Atlantis, and Atlantis falling, and Egypt basically having these pyramids built in the time of Atlantis, or some a little after.
Right.
But definitely the Sphinx. And so then they basically recorded, and this is where Solon went to learn the story, right? It was actually on a pillar,
right,
made of orculum or whatever it's called, that was unrustable and unweatherable. And there was written the story of the sunken, lost civilization of Atlantis, as you know, this is 600 BC or so. And this is what passed on for 200 years to Plato. And so Egypt definitely is, I think, the big tie to this. I think that Egypt.
Well, yeah, that's where the pyramids are.
Yeah, I think that's the colony, with one of the main colonies.
The superior buildings, you know, the structures of, you know, Abydos and you know, all the temples that are, you know, just they're so superior to everything else in the world.
Yeah, it could only have been built by an advanced civilization.
Superior race, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the earliest buildings that we have of Egypt, which is, you know, like Saqqara, a 64-acre site.
Right. Yeah.
You know, math is perfect. You know, it's unbelievable. So yeah, I think it's amazing to think about the implications. How far back does it go? What are the Atlanteans? What civilization was old to the Atlanteans?
Right. Yeah. Who was before them? Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. If there were
their ancient history
before them,
what was their ancient history? You know, I mean, this is like, think about that.
You know, what did they lose?
Yeah.
You know, what amnesia did they have?
Right. Because remember, if we're talking 20, 30,000 years, we just talked about man having this mental capability known, at least in anthropological records today, which is always a changing field. You know, these stuff isn't locked.
Mm-hmm.
This is an open thing. But we're talking 200,000-300,000 years, right? At least, or even longer for modern man. So, you know, we're talking 20, 30,000 years, like 10%. So what was the 90% behind them? You know, was there other civilizations that were even more advanced than them? You know, we hear these other civilizations like, you know, Mu and Mu.
Well, a lot of people want to replace it with aliens, and you know, they want to speculate, you know, and it's really hard to speculate back that far. Anything more than what would have been a natural people that lived on, you know, the planet, and you know, we're either hunters or you know farmers in some way. You know, you really can't picture them having cars and things like that. You know, you just want to picture them being so in harmony with nature. You know, living outside. You know, it's just, that's what we want to picture, like a utopian society. But you know, for all we know, it was brutal. You know, they had, you know, instead of nuclear bombs, they had something even worse. You know, the Brahma weapon. You know, I mean, it's you know, it goes so far back that it's all you can do is imagine. You know, and you can't look at the results we have today and take anything away from that, because you know, 12,000 years ago, we emerged from that. You know, then after that, here we are. But before that, you know, we don't know. You know, it just got buried, man. It's just like buried. Look at the Grand Canyon. You know, I mean, something that causes that to happen, you don't think that it could, you know, bury entire, you know, states and cities and millions of people and all their technology in like one night. you know, just a wave of mud, just burying it under like 1,000 feet of mud.
Yeah, I mean, just get an ant bed and look at it, and then realize that there's tens of thousands of ant colonies with an entire society inside it. And all you got to do is get a bucket of water that you got out of your yard, and you go and you say bye, and you literally wipe that thing off of your driveway or whatever it is, and they're gone, and they're never.
And you throw some grits in for good measure, so that they take the grits down to the queen and she blows up.
But you know what? But ants, much like people, what do? They rebuild.
Yeah, they run away and they rebuild. They find a new spot.
There's another little mound that looks just like the other mound.
Yep, exactly.
You know, and they do the exact same thing somewhere else, and that's what we.
Where do they get that? Where do they get that knowledge to do that? You know.
Right, and that's
because one of them does it, all the other ones follow. You know.
Well, that's exactly the key. Is that like who taught them that, right? Or, you know, who's the leader of that? How did that all get? Because, you know, if we know that we've been around for 300,000 years or longer with modern brain, you know, why haven't we done that at the beginning? If it's a genetic thing, if it's something that we're just in our code to do, well, then we would have seen societies 300,000 years ago. We would have seen buildings built, and so that's just not how it works. It's not just like this natural state of evolution. Oh, well, we just figure things out. Well,
no one's found any written records, you know, and you would think through all of the research done, there would be something, you know, there would be an amazing tablet that was found, you know, that had something no one's ever seen on it, that was dated at blah, 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 you know, 45,000 BC, you know. I mean, that's the thing. There's just nothing. You know, the only thing we really see is the megaliths, and they're questionable as to how old they are. You know, we don't even know how they built them really with what they had. So there's
we have the myths, you know, we have.
Yeah, there's no answers. There's just myths, right?
And people go, well, why are they being so, you know, creative about it? Well, first off, that's how they thought. You know, they always put things.
That's all they had to do was make art.
Yeah, but even at let's say at, you know, 3000 BC. I mean, we're talking, you know, 10,000 years, you know, prior. So at that point, it's a pretty big myth and story. It's not going to be like
there's nothing there. Yeah.
John built this over here. I mean, you know, we've only been around for 100 years.
Here's a circle of stones that's 40,000 years old.
Yeah.
Go ahead and try to figure out what it is. That's Adam's calendar. You know.
Yeah.
So 200,000 years old. You know. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
You don't know.
So we all have to keep an open mind to this stuff. And this is actually
absolutely.
If there's any one topic that basically is the, you know, the red dot on the dartboard of what ancient amnesia means, it would be Atlantis, because that's our most recent ancient amnesia. We know more about dinosaurs that existed 30, you know, 40 or 60, 70, 80 million years ago than we do about our civilization and kind of where it started and how how language got dispersed and how these buildings were built and, you know, where all this began. Like that's what's fascinating to me, is that we can go way further back in time and we have all this data and we can kind of just study things and flesh things out. But we know less about 15,000 years ago than we do 100 million years ago.
Well, how are we going to pass on the question to everyone? What are we thinking? Like read the Critias by Plato?
Yeah.
Atlantis, the Antediluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly.
Yes, that's
everything by Manly Hall that relates to Atlantis.
Manly Hall is an amazing Atlantis lecture. It's about, I want to say 4 to 6 hours long. He breaks it down. And what he does is he goes to America. He basically is compiling evidence for each major area of the world. So it's like for him, that's a good start if you just want to get a good brief over, because, you know, this guy probably knew more. He definitely knew more about it than Ignatius Donnelly. He knew more about it than probably anybody that's in the relative modern area. And then you can start going to like Ignatius Donnelly. Then you can start going to, you know, it's just the books itself, like the myths that are out there. There's a lot of Mayan material. Just read about Mayan myth. Like, what did they believe? How their civilization started, and you're going to start seeing how all this stuff ties together. What about, you know, what does it mean if the Greek gods were kings of Atlantis? What does it mean if the Egyptian gods were there, or the king's list was, you know, put all that perspective into your research. And then when you when you start to read it, you kind of see how, oh, well, this isn't just fantastical mythology that's just all over the place, that there's a lot of rooted history that's behind these figures. You know, look at Enoch, right? Like in Noah and the stories of the book of Enoch, and, you know, how he was involved in this pre-flood time. You know, what creatures,
Yeah.
who was he with whenever they were showing
messages.
they were showing him the whole world, saying the world's gone rancid, we're going to have to destroy it, you know, this is what's going to happen, we're going to cause a huge flood, you know.
Well, that's a tale that's been told a lot of times. You know, Gilgamesh, the, you know, Epic of Gilgamesh.
Right.
You know, it's pretty much a parallel right there to the flood. You know, and a lot of people take that stuff literally. They don't realize that it's just the same tale passed down, you know, so many times. And then at a certain point, the timeline just ends. You know, the information just stops, and it all comes to around that 12,000 year ago point. You know, I mean, you know, Randall's got a different idea, Graham's got a different idea. You know, this guy and this guy over here, they've got different ideas, but it all comes down to that certain point. So I think that's probably the point that could sort of be the missing link for a lot of people, you know, is using Atlantis, you know, using all the known stuff that we've read and seen from Manly Hall and all that, to answer a lot of the questions they have. You know, it really is the missing link that everybody kind of just passes over because they're so mystified by it, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Atlantis actually kind of emerges as the only answer after many, many years of research into how we all got this. I mean, it all just points to a monolithic culture that existed, that was advanced. And what I think people have a problem with is the word advanced, right? Because they always have to translate things into modern
jet
times.
airplanes and Teslas and then, you know, cell phones and all that crap.
Right. If there's anything that you can get out of our show and out of our research and the stuff that we're doing with Ancient Amnesia, is that we're just trying to show you that the ancients did things simpler, and they did it in a smarter, easier way. And they kept their connection to natural laws and their connection to nature. There was no need to get to the level that we're at today. And to a large degree, what we're doing is going to have to be kind of broken down, simplified, and scaled down in the future. Right. The future may not be, you know, that the far future actually may look more like the ancient past than people may realize.
Well, maybe they all started out like we are now, and they progressed into that point. And,
right.
You know, maybe they did grow and become the people that were connected to nature after their, you know, 15 to 20,000 year cycle, you know, and basically, you know, maybe they destroyed the cars and the cell phones and all that crap that clutter their lives. Maybe they said, let's recycle this stuff into artwork and jewelry and, you know, edifices to remind us of our past. And, you know, of course they couldn't account for, you know, an asteroid or, you know, a celestial body moving within, you know, 500,000-600,000 miles of us, you know, and just wiping everyone out. But, you know, yeah, maybe that was what they did. Maybe they became like we are now, and then perfected themselves and lost all that crap and went back to nature. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, you got to remember, what we are now is 100 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the Industrial Revolution was the beginning of what we have. Yeah.
What's it going to be like in 5,000 years with this trend? You know, so
everything will be operating off of the mind.
We really have to understand that all bets are off here.
Right. Yeah,
we have no idea, and that there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like everything that's been done has been done to some degree before.
Sure.
So if there's anything that we can leave, you know, with this conversation to people, is to, you know, open your minds to, you know, how long we've been here, and how long we've been doing what we're doing, and where we might be in 10,000 years or 5,000 years. I mean, that's what makes it so magical, is just imagine these kind of thoughts, you know, these kind of ideas of where we've been in the distant past and where we're headed in the distant future, and how that relates to where we are now and the cycles that we're going through. We can see how fast humanity can do something in 100 years. Well, okay, what if there's been societies for 20, 30, 40,000 years?
Right.
And multiple of them. So, you know, that's what we want. We want everybody to understand that the amnesia that is ancient, it goes back further than we probably all realize.
It's very ancient. Yes.
It's very, very ancient. So yeah, so I think that's a good cover.
Well, I like it. I thought it was a great subject to talk about because pretty much every day I think about it. I watch Manly Hall when I'm working in the shop. I'll put the antiquities video on and just watch that. And just every time I listen to it, I recognize it and I remember it, but I hear a little something new. So, we'll put some links in the description down below, probably to a couple of the videos and maybe some links to a couple of the books and just kind of give everybody an opportunity to take it all in and make their own decisions. And I think that's what's cool about Atlantis is it's still sort of that last bastion of wonder, where, nobody's right, you could be the one, and nobody's going to tell you you're wrong. They might, but they're wrong, and I think it's really probably the last frontier of, major mystery for us. We've already, figured out all these cataclysms that happened in the past. And like you said, the dinosaurs, we know more about dinosaurs, but here's Atlantis that was, 12 to 20,000 years ago. And it's this big mystery, but I think a lot of us know it was real. It may not have been what we thought it was or what others thought it was, but it was definitely there, and it definitely had some sort of hold on the stories that people passed down through all the cataclysms, and of the most important stories they would remember to tell, on their deathbed. That was probably one of the top 3 or 4, just, oh yeah, don't forget to tell don't forget to ask Grandpa about Atlantis, and he'll tell you all about it. And yeah, it's just, it's an amnesia, it's basically a lost thing that we're going to have to refine. And, you guys go out and get all these links and read up on it and share with us what you think. And we'll probably revisit this more than once, since Josh and I really enjoy talking about Atlantis, and we probably talk about it another hour after the show and, just delve into it. So I would say this probably concludes podcast number.
I would say 4, isn't it? 4, yeah.
Podcast 4? Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right. I'm just getting it right.
Yeah, guys. Yeah, send us information. I mean, we want to know what you know.
Yeah.
We want to know what you think, and this is how we're learning. And if you want to be on the show, go to ancientamnesia.com. Send us an email, message us on Facebook, and let us know what you want to talk about, and kind of send us some links to the things that are relevant to your subject, and we will kind of put you on a list and maybe have you on, and we'll kind of discuss some of those things in the future. We want everybody to chime in, and this is about us being a community here, and everybody getting a say on what we get to discuss, because we really just want to talk about everything. And there's really nothing that's off the limits for us, whether it be mathematics or geometry or science or archaeology or philosophy. We're decent with some of these. We're lost on others. So we're really relying on you guys to kind of come in and let us know what you know. And we've seen some amazing people, really sharp minds on the page. And, and so, don't be shy. Reach out to us. And, we hope to see you next time. And in the meantime, I hope you enjoy, the page and what we're posting. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, guys. And we'll talk to you on the next podcast. We don't know what it's going to be. We'll probably take some advice from folks, but we really appreciate you coming out and listening to us, and hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. So cheers.
Cheers, guys.